Welcome back to Sports Talkin' right here on SWKS Radio. Now, as you can tell, it's a little bit different today. It's not just me and Phil. We've got a special guest, Max, 6 part-time jobs, a little bit of everything, master of all. Welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Of course.
Yeah.
And
We're
I know
excited.
that you taught
Sorry.
at KU for a period of time. Max, I want to start out ask you, what was that experience like for you?
Well, my first job was teaching 7th grade English in suburban Minneapolis. And I think if they would have let me coach, I'd have been very happy staying being a junior high or high school teacher and a coach, but they wouldn't let me coach because I wasn't certified to coach, because at that time you had to have a degree in either PE or you had a major or minor in PE. My snobbish liberal arts school, Knox College, didn't offer PE major or minor, and I wouldn't have done that anyway. I was an English major. That's what I really liked. So I had to start by volunteering to be an assistant coach at the University of Minnesota. So my joke back to my principal, who wouldn't hire me to coach 7th graders, that year I was coaching Dave Winfield. Now, he was a sophomore outfielder. I was hitting him fungos. I wouldn't say I was. He didn't mention me in his Hall of Fame speech, but that was kind of how. So again, I just continued on this academic thing, mostly because I wanted to be a coach.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And then you retired, and now you're back yet again. What has that experience been like coming back at this point?
Well, what happened is that I retired in 2019, and I'd still kept in close touch with the school. I still had a lot of friends on the faculty, and when a former student would come back, we'd often go over there. But 3 years ago, KU created a sports media emphasis in the School of Journalism, and it became popular almost overnight. And we had the curriculum set up for it really well, but didn't have enough people to teach all the classes, so the dean asked me if I'd come back and teach a class every semester. That was kind of how I got back involved in that. But what I taught I'd been at KU 23 years before I convinced the faculty to offer the first sports class they'd ever offered, called Sports in the Media, and I taught that for 12 years. And basically, when I consulted friends from around the country, there were a lot of different ways to teach sports in the media. I chose a theme of the bad habits of big-time college sports sponsored by television dollars. Two things that I knew quite a bit about, because I taught at Missouri for 12 years before I went into the TV business for a while, and then came to KU at that time. So I'd seen big time college sports from the 70s on to where we are today. Now, when I started that class, teaching at KU Sports and Media, that was in another century that I started that. And my theme of bad habits have all just gotten worse because there's just more and more money all the time from TV. So if I was still teaching, well, I remember about the 10th year, maybe it was the 5th year of teaching the class, when I did my opening session. I said, I would like to thank NCAA, big time college football and big time college basketball for giving me new content to talk about each semester. I didn't have to rehash anything,
That's
and
awesome.
the schools and the conferences and the NCAA just kept doing things that took a bad situation and has made it worse. And today it's the worst of all.
That last session we talked, Max, Cray and I had the discussion, and I said we discussed the after effects of the NFL draft, and in this draft, over 50% of the kids, I think it was 55%, came from the Big Ten or the SEC, and I've been viewing it saying that the networks through the college conferences, I believe, are trying to narrow the competitiveness down to two leagues, and I think the NFL draft kind of shows that that's not exactly off base. What do you think?
Well, it's cheaper for them to just have two leagues
Yep.
than trying to, and clearly what we have now, I've for many years been referring to, you know, Power Five conference sports as AAA, you know, because there's no minor league football, and
Right.
the G League, well, it's A ball. It's not even double A as far as I'm concerned. But
Yeah.
but the point is, the colleges have been serving as the minor leagues for professional sports for many, many, many years, and professional sports don't pay a nickel to help the colleges do just that. So the colleges have to raise their own money to perform that service for professional sports.
Yeah.
Something doesn't sound right there.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, Max. In the future, though, we are just getting started with this whole NIL situation. So where do you see the fix coming from? Right now, it's running rampant. At some point, they're going to step in and say, hey, look, there needs to be a salary cap. Or do you put a positional salary cap in saying you can't pay more than $10 million for a quarterback? Where do you see an end?
There won't be an end until all parties accept the fact that big-time college football and basketball, and maybe women's basketball and baseball are moving, but for sure, college football and college basketball, they are already professional sports. And so the sooner we start treating them like professional sports, the easier it'll be for everybody. Right now, it's professional sports with no rules. I mean, all these cases you hear of players transferring to 4 different colleges during their career. Well, I bet you get quite an education doing that. I mean, my being involved, making one transfer is difficult. I worked with transfer students quite a bit because many would later decide they wanted to come into journalism, and oftentimes somebody had to spend an extra, even if you'd been at Missouri for the first 2 years, you might have to take some other classes to be able to transfer in.
Right.
And these folks that are transferring, like from a JUCO to a small college, then to a mid, you can accumulate credit hours, but I am completely sold on the idea they're not getting an education, because the senior level classes, the ones you need to graduate, usually have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 prerequisites you have to take. And if you've been over, across the state line at some other college or university, the transfer will accept the hours, but they won't accept the prerequisites on that. So again, you accumulate hours. I know of a player that I knew back at Mizzou who accumulated 156 credit hours. 120 is usually what you need to graduate. 156 credit hours and didn't get a degree.
Wow.
Man.
And I'll bet if I dug further, I could find all kinds of examples of that. And today it's gotten a whole lot worse.
Yeah. So since you don't see it ending, what other disasters might be laying ahead as I don't know what year this is, 4th year?
The first year I taught that sports in the media class, I think it was 1993. Dr. Bob Frederick, one of the finest human beings who ever walked the face of the earth, was the athletic director at that time. I had him in as my first guest speaker, a month or so into the class. And I said, I don't need you to really prepare anything. I'll just ask you some questions to get the conversation started. And then the students will jump in with their questions. And I will never forget his quote, because I asked him something about all these goings on with TV rights, conference shifting, and everything like that. And he goes, I am worried this whole system is going to implode. Mm-hmm. Well, he was right, and
Yeah, yeah.
you know, unfortunately, he passed away at way too young of an age. But I'm not sure he'd have been happy to stick around to see what the ending's going to look like, because
Yeah.
he was a guy who really believed in college sports being part of the educational process. And since I went to a Division III school that had no athletic scholarships allowed for any place at D3, uh, everybody knew, including all the players and the coaches, we were there to get an education. And thankfully I did that, and that's why I've had the career that I've been so happy to have. And I did learn a lot from playing sports. It is part of the educational experience for those who want to do it, but not now. Not
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I agree. So NIL out of hand. Where, what do you think's going to happen here in the next couple of years as far as salary cap, if I can call it that? I know you've got an
Well,
opinion about that.
professional sports, well, except baseball, do have a salary cap, you know, and if you sign a contract, if it's only for a 1 year, if it's a 1 year deal, everybody knows you can leave. But if you sign a 3 year deal, you're there for 3 years, you know, unless they decide to cut you and pay you. Again, the whole professional thing has evolved over time to where, yeah, the players make a lot of money, but there's some protection for them too, that the new coach just can't come in and clean house and start all over again. And you wouldn't be able to refill all of your positions because the folks you'd be interested in coming, they're not all free agents every year like this. I mean, again, imagine any sport, at least baseball, even without the salary cap. It doesn't have free agency every year. Remember how long baseball had to fight to get free agency at all?
Right. Yeah.
Again, it's the game with no rules. That's
Yeah.
big time college sports.
Yeah.
So, Max, let me ask you then, at what point do these conferences look at themselves and say, look, here is the problem? We saw Tyron Stokes just commit to KU. He's getting revenue share up to $8 million in NIL. Bryce Underwood, Michigan's quarterback, just got paid $10 million last season to go to Michigan. What amount of money is too much?
Those guys can't. Well, and you see, Mark Cuban was in on the story this morning. Mark Cuban was in on the hiring of Fernando Mendoza to be the Indiana quarterback last year.
Right.
That seemed to work out all right. Again, there's absolutely no limit on this. And do you ever hear anyone mention the word about academics anymore? I mean, the NCAA loves to throw around that word student athlete. Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, that horse left the barn a long time ago. But
I will say this, and Cray and I have talked about Shadur Sanders. And I don't check Facebook very much, but I saw a picture of Shadur Sanders in a cap and gown. He went back and got his degree from Colorado.
Wow.
Yeah. So if that's, looks to be true, that's good for him to do that.
But and again, he he transferred just once, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But honestly, my question for any of the football players or basketball players who have transferred, I'm glad you got your degree. Did you get an education?
Right. Yeah,
When
good
I worked the Big 12 tournament in basketball this past March, part of my job, I had to know what was going on with each of the teams, so I'd pick up the game notes. And one of the Big 12 universities, it was usually pretty standard when Phil, you've seen this a lot, when you get the handout of that, it gives a little information about, the player, his family, maybe how he ended up at that particular thing, and the major. And so I started looking at majors, and I had one school from the Big 12 that 12 of the 13 players in the sheet were majoring in undergraduate studies. I have no idea. I guess they're taking classes, and then all kinds of other euphemisms for the same thing.
Yeah.
General studies or academic studies. And every now and then I'd find somebody who was a sports media major or something like that, or a communications major. But I mean, I was appalled at and then a number of the other Big 12 schools didn't list the major anymore. So that really sent me
Yeah.
a lesson in what was going on with that. You know, I kind of see how universities got caught up in this, but
Well, now, let me ask you this, because it seemed like some of the financial burden is getting shifted to the university. How do you think that's going to play out?
that is happening, and that's at a time when state governments, particularly state institutions, are not chipping in
Right.
as much
I,
money as they did before.
yeah, and I would think that it would be unpopular with the voting public, the taxpayer. I think that would be a very unpopular thing.
I worry that the the voting public is more concerned about how the Jayhawks and Wildcats sports teams are doing than whether we're turning out any good engineers, doctors, journalists. You know,
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
You know,
Yeah.
Max, I wanted to ask you though, do you blame the student athletes for playing the system the way they are? Because
Oh,
I think about it as,
goodness,
why would
no.
you not?
No, not at all. And quite frankly, some of the dollars that you guys were just tossing around that people are getting, they couldn't make that much money in their first year in professional ball.
Correct.
Right?
And,
Correct.
I do know of one baseball player who was playing at a major university who took a pay cut when he got drafted by a major league team in the fourth round and went to A-ball. Now again, in his case, he understood the circumstances and made what he thought was his best decision, but still,
It's tough.
yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, I try to talk about it as much as I can, Max. That it's kind of a jab. Wichita State didn't have anyone drafted in this year's NFL draft, and Cray laughs with me and says, "Well, there's a pretty good reason why." You ever think a school like that would ever be able to get a football program back? What is your opinion?
And I mean, I'm worried that, Miami of Ohio and Central Michigan and Toledo can't continue to
May not be able to
field
do it.
teams.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, First of all, football is an expensive sport to finance anyway because of all the equipment. A lot of the small colleges, you know, you know, have difficulties with that just because of the pure expense of it.
yeah.
But at least my old school, Knox College, plays in a conference where every road trip is, at most like a 4 or 5 hour bus ride. Well, now the Big 12, which stretches from Central Florida to Arizona, and again, one of the things that disgusts me most of all is those conferences were all set up around the idea of generating more TV dollars. Everybody understands and accepts that. But now, for example, the KU soccer team, I believe, had to go on a road trip to Arizona and play one game on Friday and then stay over and then play the other Arizona school on Sunday, you know, 2 time zones away. A lot of games are during the week, and I remember when West Virginia joined the Big 12, a 747 can't land in the Morgantown airport. Maybe they can now, but given that that's sitting in the mountains, I doubt if that's changed. You had to fly to Pittsburgh and drive there. Well, football, they play on Saturday, so you fly out Saturday evening. No big deal. Okay, what about the basketball team that has to go out on Thursday night and then get to another town by the time Saturday rolls? I mean, it's just when we had the old Big Eight, I thought that was the perfect conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Colorado was out of the way to get to, but the others,
Right.
they were all driving distance.
Yeah, and a real fan could follow their team and go on the road.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
nobody had to miss school to play on the team. So at that time, you had to have a real college degree programming going. And if not, the NCAA would jump in on that and make sure that happened. But I remember Dr. Frederick telling the class that day that he spoke to him is that if we wouldn't have agreed to let Texas and Texas A&M into the Big Eight, TV wasn't going to pay any attention
yeah,
to us anymore. We wouldn't have a TV deal, and you know, and so TV kind of ended up calling all of the shots on this. Now that's in some ways much different ball game now because of all the streaming opportunities and all the folks like Apple and Paramount that are getting into the broadcasting business. You know, even though they're not traditional networks or anything.
yeah. Do you think sports conferences like the Big 12, the SEC, do you think they'll ever be able to form their own television networks and utilize the streaming, and then they control all the outcomes?
But not well. I mean, but they couldn't make the money they do now
You don't
because
think?
ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox have a whole lot more money than the Big Ten Conference has
Yeah. They,
combined.
they,
And because there's such competition for who gets the broadcasting rights, the numbers go up. I mean, one of the presentations I do in my class was how the broadcasting rights had grown over the years. And I mean, and it was like a rocket ship, the way the rights fees were going up. But also the money that the schools were getting was going up that way.
Yeah.
I remember I looked at a chart the other day and I started tracking that the first year that the NCAA made each athletic department report their athletic expenditures for that year. At that time, KU, K-State, the other, big Eight conference schools, not Oklahoma, but the others, they were all spending about $40 million on all of their sports. About 18 years later, it was up to 220 million.
wow.
And as I'm sure you can guess, the budgets and the state money coming to KU and K-State and Wichita State had not gone up on that same trajectory, not at all. Matter of fact, it had been cut over all those years.
Wow.
And
Well, Max, we've had you about a little over 20 minutes. Anything you want? What's your favorite story from your time at either KU or Missouri? What's your favorite story as a college professor? Do you have one?
boy, I'm not. But, I mean, I'm trying to relate it back to sports.
Yeah.
There are-
You got to like I know you taught current KU play-by-play guy Brian Haney.
Yes.
I know I've
Oh,
got a
Yes.
Brock Bowling was a guy that
I've got a great Brian Haney story.
Okay,
and I'm
that is a
proud
good
to
one.
tell it because he has been one of the most effective people in managing his career that I've ever had in my 50 years of college teaching. When Brian was a senior, he was taking the final class that he needed to graduate. It was called Media Management. And the way I'd set up the class is that you would have to come up with a project that you would manage during the semester and convince me of that idea. So Brian wrote a plan to start the first sports talk show on KJHK, the campus radio station, which was rock and roll to the nth degree. They never had anything like that. I remember when Brian talked about it, I said, well, good luck getting that idea sold, but if you can do it, I think that would be great. And like a week later, he came back to me and said, yeah, I can have the 4 to 5 time slot. And it was, I think twice a week. I don't even remember the details of it, but he had something set up like that. I go, well, boy, congratulations. I said, now one more thing. Go get a sponsor for it. Because if you want to go in to radio, as he did, that it's not going to be enough just to be the broadcaster, not to be the talk radio host or, the play-by-play guy. You're going to be involved in the sales and marketing for whatever radio station you're working for. That was before the streaming and everything there. And he left my office and came back an hour later and said, I got Pizza Shuttle all set up. They want me to do the remote, the first broadcast outside their shop. And I said, great, sold.
Yeah.
And
for any of us that know about that, the Pizza Shuttle, that's a great pizza up there. They've, I think, recently gone out of business, but I lived in Manhattan and loved getting Pizza Shuttle on the weekends.
Best thing about Pizza Shuttle is they were open till 3 a.m. on the weekends, so that's what they're famous for.
That's a great story.
And I don't need to tell two radio guys the importance about making sure that you can sell spots to make sure you can keep the doors open and everything.
Absolutely, yeah. People come into our office all the time. They don't realize that's the only revenue stream that we have in the radio business is that we sell sponsorships. It catches me off guard almost. It's so common.
Yeah.
It would seem that I would get used to it. So let's shift out of NIL and college. You also have another part-time job. I've been drinking out of my Kansas City Royals cup. You're a professional official scorekeeper. How in the world did that happen? And real quickly, is that a lot of fun? I would think that'd be kind of fun, but also maybe a little pressure.
You got it right on both counts, Phil. I work for MLB. I don't work for the Royals. Now, I have only worked Royals games, but I'd be eligible, to do a Cincinnati Reds game or something because I work for MLB. One of my guest speakers for my sports and media class was Mike Swanson, the longtime media relations director for the Royals. And he'd come every year and he did a really good job of explaining to the students of what he did in training to make sure his players knew how to deal with the media. So that was why I kept having him back. And I'd known him before that anyway, but got to know him even better then. And then later on, his daughter took my class, so he paid really close attention to what I was doing at that time. But I don't remember exactly what year this was, but I was going to be moving from an 11-month contract to a 9, so I was going to have my summers free. And I said, Swan, if anything comes up and if they need help on any of the broadcasts or anything like that, I'd be happy to do that because I'd worked in live TV a lot in my previous other jobs during my career. And he said he would do that. And then, a year or so later, he came back and I said, you got anything? He goes, think you might want to be an official scorer? So I never really thought of that. And he goes, well, he said, here, think about it, and if you want to fill out this application. So I did that. And then I got a note from MLB, and they wanted me to take a rules test. And I did that. And I played college baseball. I was a volunteer baseball coach for 4 years. Well, 1 year at Minnesota and then 4 years at Mizzou when I was getting my master's. Then I continued to either coach or then when they started men's senior baseball in Kansas City, I started playing again when I was 40 and played that till I was 72. So I had a strong background in baseball all that time. And, there was no feedback on the test or anything like that. And I remember, I got freelance jobs every now and then. When MLB.com started, I was, a lot of times I'd cover, their beat reporter didn't travel with the team, so I'd cover the visitors a lot of times when they came into town. And every now and then just pick up a freelance thing. I'm good friends with the folks from the Cardinals, so I'd keep stats with them when they would come to town. And then Swanee comes back, this is about another year or so later, he came back to speak to my class. I said, how's that official scoring thing coming along? He goes, you're in the queue. I go, what does that mean? He goes, well, you're a candidate. And then I think it was another full year after that he called and said, are you ready to be an official scorer? So then I did have some training I had to do through MLB. And for 3 or 4 games, I sat beside the official scorer and saw what he had to do. and then he sat with me the first couple of games I did. So that was how I got started on it there. But I do think now that one of the changes MLB had made that benefited me. Previously, the only guys who were the official scorers were members of the Baseball Writers Association. If you'd been the beat reporter for, X team, then you're next in line to be the official scorer. And they wanted more diversity in that. And I think the fact that I had been involved in baseball more ways than just being a journalist, I think was one of the reasons. I mean, for example, one of our trainers, and he's my favorite guy to work with. Anytime I have a question, I call him up. He does Tampa Bay, and his real job, he's been the baseball coach at one of the colleges in Florida for the last 40 years or something like that. And so he is really, really helpful in a lot of ways with us. So that's kind of how it happened. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that I didn't know as much about baseball as I thought I did. But I hope I've been a good student and can continue to learn on that. And, Jason Stark writes an article every year about, and the article is things I saw this year that I'd never seen in baseball before. And I see, see a couple of those things come up every now and then, but I enjoy how much I've learned about it, and I love the camaraderie we have of the people who work together in that whole area. The person who does, it's called the stringer, he does the game day on the computer. He sits right next to me. The pitch clock operator is in that row. A couple of other people doing other data-based kinds of things, and I like the intricacies and the analytics of baseball. But the thing that I try not to be too conscious of, but I'm certainly mindful that a lot of players have financial incentives based on numbers. So if I give something an error and the batter doesn't get the RBI, if when I have to choose the winning pitcher based on who was most effective, because nobody went the 5 innings to qualify for it. Wins and losses sometimes matter there. So again, it's not a burden, but it certainly is an element that comes into play, because we do, as part of the collective bargaining agreement, and this was like 5 or 6 years ago, there's a formal way of a player or a club official appealing a scoring decision. And it's in the CBA, and it's a very formal thing. They write their, here's why I think it should be a hit, and you scored an error, or the other way around, or here's why I should get the RBI, something like that. And then I get a chance to respond to that. And then we have a panel of 3 ex-major leaguers who look at all of the appeals, and they look at the video from the play and make a decision off of that. And one of the things I think was really smart about the way this was put together, those 3 ex-major leaguers, who I'm not going to name them, but they were all major league players for several years, but none of them were superstars. It's not like the guy that, Bobby Witt wouldn't make a very good evaluator, because every play is made. If you don't make the play, then it can't be made.
You're right.
It's not the criteria. Our criteria is ordinary effort by the average major league player at that position. But that's kind of a tricky standard too, because the ordinary effort, I think I can understand that by having played. But there's not an ordinary player on that field any night that you. They're all extraordinary right from the start there. So, but again, I don't fret. I'm thankful that we have that appeal decision. It's kind of like, I think the umpires are somewhat grateful that there's a challenge process, because it shows how often they're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Very good. Well, we appreciate you coming and giving us a half hour, a little bit more of that of your time, Max. Anything else to add, Cray, or any other questions you can think of?
No, this has been awesome, Max. It's so great to have you on here, and I hope we can do this again in the future.
and you can tell I enjoy talking about sports here a lot there too. Well, the funny thing, when I taught that sports class for the first time, at that point I had 34 years of college journalism teaching. Broadcast news was my main specialty. And when I walked into the sports class, I said, after 34 years, they finally given me a course I know something about. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, have a good rest of your day, and thanks again for your time today, Max.
let me know if you guys make it up to the Royal sometime, and if I'm there, I'll say hi in the press box, and if
Yeah.
I'm just going to be there as a fan, I'll catch up with you someplace then.
Sounds good. Well, thank